Hello, lovely and beautiful friends. This is Reverend Bonnie, and welcome to Spiritual Center Spokane. 2 days away from Christmas. Woohoo! Tomorrow's Christmas Eve. This is a pre-record. It's actually Sunday. It's solstice, but it's Sunday. I'm going to be hosting a Christmas party today, so I've got my Christmas attire on, and I love this season. Absolutely, totally and completely love this season. So I'm so glad you're here. Yay. And I'm glad that the audio is working double yay. So let's go ahead and just take a moment of blessing before we move forward today. So I just want to give thanks for each and every person who can hear the sound of my voice, for they have said yes to receiving a spiritual message. And in reality, they already know everything that I say, that we are coming together in order to resonate, in order to remember, in order to lift each other up into the consciousness of God, the consciousness of the Christ, the consciousness of the eternal divine love. And so we come together today in order to shed false beliefs that don't resonate with the beautiful high vibration of capital T truth. And we come together in order to remember who we are and to remember the source from which we come. And so, as we gather together this night, we do so knowing that in just a couple days, we're celebrating the birth of this consciousness that we call Christ consciousness, where the presence of God lived an embodied existence. And people looked at this individual Jesus and said, "Are you the Son of God?" For there is something different about the vibration of this individual. And so we come together to remember that our vibration may also be lifted and that we may be a place where eternity shows up in time. And for this I give thanks. And together we say, and so it is. Amen. All right. So last week was weird, wasn't it? I was actually on live, but there was no sound. So apologies to you guys. I'm going to need to figure out from YouTube, K Pasa, what was the deal? And so I re-recorded what I thought I had recorded live, and yet I left out a whole bunch of stuff and promised I'd cover it today because it is something I've been contemplating. And what I've been contemplating is just how extensive our indoctrination has been into being part of our culture, just as is true with every single culture on the planet, that there are rituals and there are stories and there are songs and there are programs and books and all kinds of stuff that says this is where the lines are, these are the lines, and this is where you stay in the line if you are good at being one of us. And it is so deeply, deeply indoctrinated that I knew a man who was in meditation for years. And he said he was meditating by a river. And what came up in his consciousness was the commercial plop, plop, fizz, fizz. I guess that's the Alka-Seltzer commercial. That came up because he had heard it so many times that when he got quiet, that's what was inside. And so I just have been thinking about, as long as I've been on the planet, I had a birthday a couple weeks ago, just how much I have been trained to be a certain kind of human and a certain kind of female human. And it's been interesting to strip that down and apart. And I've been actively doing that for decades now. But it's interesting to see how deep that this training has been. And we call our perception, the way that I see the world and the way that you see the world, consciousness. So we have our individual consciousness, and then we have the shared consciousness of Christ, or the shared consciousness of Buddha, or the shared consciousness of spirit. So we have got a shared collective, holy, sacred, eternal consciousness that is connected with our soul and that knows that we are so much more than the moment we are having in time, and yet is awake to the preciousness of being embodied on planet Earth in time. So it's the both and. I have come as I've grown more fully into spirit, into myself, to really realize that both and is the spiritual consciousness. So as I've been going back and thinking about the training that I have gotten to become a consciousness. What I'm aware of is of the indoctrination is that it really started in preschool or kindergarten. And there were nursery rhymes that we learned. And if you think about it, that's like a chant. We're learning something over and over and over and over again. And I find it very curious when people have Alzheimer's and they can't remember the current moment, but they can remember their youth so vividly that there's something about the repetition in our youth where we arrive wide open as spirit, and then we learn and are taught and are trained and are indoctrinated over. And when I say indoctrinated, it's not a bad thing. We need to know not to run out in the middle of the street. It doesn't hurt to know that we can be kind to each other. I mean, there's some pieces of this that are really good, but it's interesting because it isn't us, it's a training. And to be able to know the difference is very important on the spiritual journey. So from kindergarten, I'm aware that there's the nursery rhymes, there's the little songs and the ditties, row, row, row your boat gently down the stream. And interestingly enough, Wayne Dyer gave a whole talk on that song. Row, row, row your boat gently down the stream, merrily, 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 life is but a dream. And he said that that is some of the highest spiritual truth that we were taught as a young child. For row gently, be happy, merrily, merrily, and that life is a dream. And the more we become aware of our trained consciousness and the eternal consciousness, the more we can become aware of how much of our reality we really do create through our perception. And that, of course, is one of the deepest teaching of all spiritual paths. So we've got nursery rhymes, we've got songs, we have fables and stories. We have what we watch on TV. And as a little kid, I watched Captain Kangaroo. I watched JP Patches, which those were local to Seattle. And I'm trying to think, Romper Room. There were a handful, and then PBS. So so there was learning on how to be a little person through TV as well. And then, of course, we had in general TV, Leave It to Beaver, How to Be Part of a Family, and The Brady Bunch. And so we were able to see how family dynamics work. And they were, for the most part, real positive and morally grounded. So, as I've shared with you before, my father had passed away. And after he passed away, he left me some money, and I had the freedom to have some time to go deep into my spiritual practice. And not only did I have the time to do it, but it was right. Like all of the stars aligned that this was my time. So I had committed that I was going to spend 1 year in prayer and in meditation and taking walks in nature and journaling and just really getting to know the true me, the real me underneath everything. And 1 year turned into two, turned into three. So there were 3 years that I was basically in silence and solitude. There were a few exceptions to that. I did go to the grocery store. I just tried to stay as much inside myself as possible when I went out, but I rarely went out. I was very hermity on purpose, intentionally. And one of the days I went for a walk, and I think I had my iPod. I think that's what they were called back then. I think I had my iPod, and I was listening to some music, and I was walking, and it was like a thunderbolt hit me. And I said to myself, oh my goodness, my music was chosen for me. That because I grew up in America, because I grew up in Seattle, because I grew up in the 70s, there were songs on 3 radio stations that were hand-picked and that I could choose between. But I didn't have access to international music. I did not have access to digging around and finding what resonated with me. I was given a choice between like 100 songs. I think there were top 100 hits or 40 hits or whatever, but there was a select few songs that would rotate in and out. And I got to choose between those handful of songs what I liked. And I remember on this walk saying to myself, what if I grew up in Indiana? What if I grew up in Florida? What if I grew up in Mexico? What if I grew up in the Netherlands? Like, I would have been fed different music and I would have been a different person. That that first of all, I was aware of how limited my choices were. And then secondly, I was aware that they were culturally driven. And so if I had changed cultures, then my input would have been different. Interestingly enough, today my grandkids can have access to music anywhere around the world. And so it's a very different experience because there aren't 3 radio stations. There's pros and cons to both. But I just became so aware of who I am, was influenced so fully by the music choices I was given, by the date, the time frame I was born, by the location, and it was just this huge aha moment. Then from that, I had the realization that the same was true with food. When I was growing up in my neighborhood, we had all American restaurants and very few because most of the mothers stayed at home and cooked. And so there were very few restaurants. And of the non-American restaurants, there was two Chinese restaurants within a 20-minute drive, and there was one Mexican restaurant. That was our choices. And so again, I was really aware of the limitation of my food choices. And it baffles me today that my food choices are almost unlimited and that I can purchase food from all around the world and I can have out of season food during any season. And there's some thoughts that that's not actually good for your physical body. But the idea being that, again, I was fed metaphorically and literally that which resonated with the or was available in the culture at that time in my history. And then the third realization hit. So it was bam, bam, bam. And the third one was my clothing. And I thought, who the heck came up with bell bottoms? I wore bell bottom pants. I mean, really? I think they might be coming back, but oh my Lord. So, so again, actually, this is a true story. In my elementary school, girls were not allowed to wear pants. We had to wear dresses. And in fifth grade, one of the mothers gathered all of the mothers together to go up to the school and to fight the PTA so that us girls could go to school wearing pants just like the boys. And it was a really big deal that in fifth grade we got to wear pants. And I remember the names of the mothers who went up and fought it. I just, it was such a big deal. We were told what we could and couldn't wear and where we could and couldn't wear the things we were wearing. And so again, our clothes were determined by what was available at the department stores at that time in that season. So while I was doing that walk, I asked myself, who did I know that dressed unconventionally? And one of the guys from my high school dresses gender bending. And I had seen him fairly recently at a high school reunion, and I decided to call him. So I called him up and I said, I had this revelation. I am not dressing in congruence with my soul. I'm dressing with what is appropriate in our culture or what is in fashion at the time. And I said, how do I break this? How do I get out of it? And he said, you go to a thrift store. And once I got over how appalling that sounded to me, and now I love them. But at the time, it was like, I do what? And he goes, you go to a thrift store, and this is the reason why is they have fashions from decades of seasons. So you're not limited to what is in season at that moment. So I could go from department store to department store to department store, and they would have the same color spread because every year certain colors are chosen by the fashion industry. So he said, you go to a thrift store and you could get any color you want, any time of the year you want, and um, uh, any kind of style that you're looking for. So there's variety. And he said, what I want you to do is I want you to go and I want you to get some clothes that you think are obnoxiously outrageous that you wouldn't be caught dead in. And I want you to be caught dead in them or alive in them. And he said, and I want you to shop in the men's part of the store. So I want you to experience dressing the other gender. And he said, and then I want you to choose some things that you just love, regardless. And so I went and I did my assignment. And I remember leaving the house with like a really loud scarf and just thinking, everybody is staring at me like, I can't wear this. I stand out. Now, what I was trained to do was to fit in. And that's probably true of you too, is that there were repercussions when you went outside of the lines. And so this really challenged my fashion choices. And now, those of you who know me know how much I love fashion and how I will push boundaries, but I wouldn't have done it without having awoken to the desire to dress in accordance with my soul instead of what culture has taught me to dress as. So huge deal. And that is again the indoctrination, the inculturation. So peeling back these different ways that we have been told how to be is part of the spiritual journey because what we're wanting to do is to access our soul. And so it's when you've done this work and it doesn't stop, like you just keep having revelations. I've been at this for a long time, for decades, and I'm still peeling stuff back and going, oh, that's Bonnie. Oh, that's the Bonnie God created. Oh, and it's so exciting and disruptive to others because they're used to your trained self. So all of this is a surprise, which is delightful. So I wrote down the many different ways that I have become aware that we have had our consciousness built for us until we claim our own. And one is cultural indoctrination. And this is our gender roles that we're taught. I was taught to be nice, and people can treat me so poorly, and I will smile and be nice to them. There is a time and a place for that, but it isn't the only response I can have. So there is gender role indoctrination. There is rules of behavior. Again, this is the culture. There is the archetypes that exist within cultures. And like in our culture, we have a bully archetype, which wasn't me. I wasn't a bully. But we also have like the nice girl archetype, which is how I was trained. And we have our country archetype, which is, or our country indoctrination. Like when I was little, we used to do the Pledge of Allegiance and we took civic classes and we were trained into how to be Americans. That doesn't take place any longer, which is what makes it so messy, is that we don't have common agreement on what it means to be American. And in our culture right now, that's being torn apart some. So we have our cultural indoctrination. Then we have our media indoctrination. Again, back to the awareness that we could be told anything in the on the news. We could be told good news. We could be told scary bad news. We could be told horrific news. We can be told sports news. We can be, like there's a variety. And so how the media indoctrinates us through the news, but also through television, what we watch. And right now, there's a big trend of watching a lot of real crime, which I can get into, but I don't know that that's good for us. So I think it trains us into thinking that others are scary. And so there's something weird that's going on with media, but media is a part of that. Another one is church and religious doctrination. And my last boyfriend was a Jewish man. And I used to say to him all the time, is this you or is this your culture? Is this your religion? Like, is this you or is this what you were trained to be? Because there's um, the show Curb Your, when we first started dating, he sat me down and said, I want you to watch Curb Your Enthusiasm. Since you're not Jewish, I want you to see how we behave. And one of the things that is very cultural is to complain. And it's very cultural to complain because it buffers when something bad happens. And so he said, I want you to see how we behave. So there were times in our relationship that I would say, stop, is this you or is this your Jewish culture, your Jewish upbringing? And we'd have conversations about that. And then, of course, there's religious, all different religions, and Christianity. And everyone's interpretation of Christianity is different based upon who they are. And some of the greatest hatred that is and evil that has been perpetrated in the world has been in the name of Christianity. And so that's not its spirit and its intent. So again, that's a form of indoctrination. And then educational, whether you went through school or were homeschooled, very different experience. Whether you left school at high school or went on to get a college degree, master's degree, PhD, all different levels of education and types of learning. And then medical, what the medical system is like. When I was a kid, the only drug, I swear, the only drug our doctor had was an antibiotic and cough syrup. I think that was it. And we would go into the doctor and he'd write a prescription for an antibiotic or tell you to take cough syrup. There just wasn't this big, huge, gigantic pharmaceutical industry that had so many options available. And that viewpoint is vastly different than a holistic viewpoint that is very different than a naturopathic viewpoint that is very different than. So you can get the how you've been enculturated into a medical system is also one of the ways that our mind has our consciousness, our individualized consciousness working. And then in India, they would call it the caste system. Here we would call it economic, your where you fall economically. And my dad used to say it's very expensive to be poor, Bonnie. And then he would go on to say, if you don't have money, you are charged more for credit cards. You are charged for checks and checks bouncing. You are, and he went through a list of everything that where like the percentage that you get for a car loan is higher if your income is lower. So he went through and showed me all of this. And he said, you want to do everything you can in your life in order to be in a higher income level because it is smart, it is advantageous. And then his thing was, of course, you can be a giver, you can give, you can be generous. And we learn in metaphysics that you practice generosity regardless of your income level, for it teaches the universe and your consciousness that you are more than who you are at the moment and more than what you have. But there's a different mindset for those who have a lot and at different levels, and we have that conversation politically right now. So it's there's a lot of factors that go into building a consciousness, and I have been really thinking about that and about what it takes to strip it down. So I started the stripping about 35 years ago, and I'm still very actively stripping, but I can feel now and see now and experience now more of who my pure self is underneath that individualized consciousness. And then, of course, what the soul is about is that your personality and the divine, your personality and spirit come together at an intersection. And they say that's what the cross means, and that's what the Star of David means, where they come together at the points, is that it is showing that when spirit and personality come together as one, that is the soul, when there is divine alignment. And so, another way of saying consciousness could include personality, but it is more than that. All right. I hope you enjoyed that. That has been a lot of contemplating on my end. And I wanted to share a little bit in this week of Christmas, a few more aspects of the Christmas story before we go into our spiritual practice. So I already talked about all Bible stories, all sacred stories are about our soul. And so when we're talking about Mother Mary, we are talking about the receptive part of ourself, the part of ourselves that is receptive to the Holy Spirit. When we are talking about Joseph, we are talking about the masculine aspect of us that is the protector and that enjoins in the vision that the presence of God had for Mary or has for Mary. So it is a protector of that vision, a fierce protector of that vision. And it is the supplier and the provider, so that that is cared for and taken care of as there is the development of the birth of Christ, the Christ consciousness. So we also looked at the angels being in metaphysics a high thought. So the angel of the Lord comes upon Mary. That's a high thought, or it can literally be, as many people have experienced, including myself, that in the invisible realm there is an angelic realm. And that angelic realm is a messenger from the Most High. And when it comes, it can come speaking, but it can also come as a vibration that vibrates, and you recognize it in your soul and can interpret it because there is the light that vibrates that has a message that you can understand. So the before anything big, the angels came and pronounced something big is about to happen. Wake up, wake up. I will be with you. I will be with you always. Let's wake up. I will be with you always. And so then there's some minor characters in the story, and I wanted to talk about that tonight. One is that Mary and Joseph were called to Bethlehem in order to do the census, if you remember. And Jesus ends up being born in a stable because there isn't room available since everyone is returning for the census. The city was full. So Bethlehem means the house of bread. And we remember in the Bible that Jesus is referred to as the bread of life. So the place Jesus is born is the house of bread, and he becomes the bread of life. And for those who participate at Eucharist or in communion, the bread represents the body of Jesus. And that goes back to Bethlehem in part, that it all ties itself together. Where Bethlehem is so important is that's where King David was born. It's his birthplace. And King David to the Jews, and remember, Jesus was Jewish. So King David to the Jews was the honorable king who loved God with all of his heart, mind, and soul. And so he was the prototype of who the Savior that would be returning would be. And so, in order for Jesus to have cred, he needed to be born in the lineage of David, which he came from, and in the city which was born, which is Bethlehem. So, Bethlehem is also where King David was anointed. And it, in addition to meaning bread of life, it also means fruitful. Bethlehem is a very fruitful place. It is a place that is full of surprises, and it is a place that is considered holy, sacred, and good. And then the wise men who show up for Jesus's birth, and remember, all of these are aspects of our own soul. The wise men who shows up, they represent the wisdom that has existed from the beginning of time, or the wisdom that comes through many lifetimes of living a spiritual, sacred life. The star represents intuition. The east, where the star was, represents the inner self. And the gifts that were brought, the gold represents spirit, the frankincense represents the worship of spirit, and myrrh represents our mortality. So, kind of body, mind, spirit thing. So, the gifts represent a representation of the multidimensional self that we are. And the wise men are inner wisdom that has existed through ancestors and our own past lives, the star meaning intuition, and the east being our own inner guidance system. So it all feeds together in the story. And so, how lovely that this is a week that we celebrate Christmas and that we look at all of this. It just brings me much joy. So, let's go ahead and let's close our eyes. Thank you for being with me today. Let's take a nice big deep breath. Inhale and exhale. Ah. Let's inhale the gold brought by the wise men, also known as spirit. Ah. And let's inhale the frankincense, which is the spiritual discipline or the spiritual practice that we engage in. And let's go ahead and breathe in the myrrh, which represents our physical life. And so, with your eyes closed, try to actively feel that star that's in the east. And just bring that light into your body temple. Each and every cell in our body is made up predominantly of water and light. So let's just bring it in. Allow the resonance to happen. And as all of the characters are vibrational addresses within ourselves, let's just bring in Mother Mary, activate her in our field and within our body temple. Let's bring in the masculine energy, Joseph. We can include the animals around. They represent the earth. They represent the mortality within our own being. They represent nature. They represent so much. We could bring them in. And just feel what it feels like to have activated body, mind, and spirit. Let's bring in angel energy and wise men energy. Feel your feet fully planted on the ground. Allow any excess energy to flow out through your feet. Oh, this feels so good. I could do this for hours. Oh, doesn't it just feel so good to be quiet and to feel into the energy fields that have existed since before you and I were born and will exist long after? And so together, let's pray. Right here and right now, I just give thanks for the presence of God, this amazing, eternal, infinite love that we recognize and that we honor on Christmas Day. And yet it is always active and alive within us day after day after day. I just give thanks that this presence of God is oh so loving and peaceful and healthy and wealthy and generous and compassionate and forgiving and everything we call good. And I give thanks that it does not exist outside of me alone. It is activated and exists inside of me also. So there's a symbiotic relatedness with these energy fields within and without and within and without. And so I give thanks that we come together today in order to activate those energies within us, to remember who we are, to celebrate this time of year together, and to give thanks for the goodness and for the glory of God within each one of us. And so I just speak my word for the courage to follow this internal guidance, for the willingness to follow the curiosity and where it leads. And when I say courage, it's a courage to be different outside of that training that we received in consciousness. And so I give thanks for Christ's consciousness showing the way. I bless each and every one of us. I give thanks that you are here watching and listening. And from the consciousness within me, I bless each and every one of us. And I call today good, and I call our lives good. And so it is. Amen. Hey, thank you guys. Have a very, very Merry Christmas. Happy Hanukkah, winter solstice, whatever you celebrate. And thank you for being you, and thank you for being here. Blessings.